Welcome to Volume and Vision. Imagine waking up tomorrow with one extraordinary ability. Not the power to stop time. Not the power to travel into the future. But something far more useful. Imagine knowing the perfect moment to do almost everything. The perfect time to study so your brain absorbs information faster. The perfect time to make an important decision. The perfect moment to ask for a promotion, begin a business, have a difficult conversation, or even simply take a break. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at someone incredibly successful and thought, they're smarter than me? Maybe they aren't. Maybe they simply knew when to act. Think about it. A seed planted in winter doesn't become a tree. Not because the seed is weak, but because the timing is wrong. The exact same seed planted a few months later can grow into something extraordinary. Life works in surprisingly similar ways. Most people spend years trying to improve their skills. They buy courses. They read books. They wake up at 5 in the morning because someone on the internet told them that's the secret. They copy billionaires' routines without asking a simple question. Does this timing actually fit my life? What if success isn't only about working harder? What if it's about working with time instead of fighting against it? Every single day, invisible clocks are ticking inside your body. You cannot hear them. You cannot see them. Yet they quietly influence your mood, your energy, your creativity, your focus, your patience, and even the quality of your decisions. The strange part is that most of us spend our entire lives completely unaware of them. Imagine driving the world's fastest sports car while never learning how the gears work. Sometimes the car flies forward effortlessly. Other times it struggles and stalls. You blame the engine. You blame yourself. But the real problem is simple. You're using the wrong gear at the wrong time. That is exactly how most people live. They try to solve difficult problems when their brain wants rest. They try to be creative when their mind wants structure. They force themselves to study during hours when concentration naturally fades. Then they wonder why success feels so exhausting. Here's something fascinating. Have you ever noticed that a problem which feels impossible at 2 o'clock in the afternoon suddenly becomes obvious after dinner? Or that sometimes you wake up with the solution to something you struggled with all night? It almost feels magical, but it isn't. Your brain has simply changed. The person sitting at your desk at 9 in the morning is biologically different from the person sitting there at 3 in the afternoon. Your body temperature changes. Your hormones change. Your alertness changes. Even your ability to notice mistakes changes. The clock on your wall keeps moving at exactly the same speed. But the clock inside your brain is constantly transforming who you are. Now here's where things become even more interesting. Imagine two students preparing for the same examination. Both study for 3 hours. Both use the same books. Both are equally intelligent. One finishes remembering almost everything. The other barely remembers half. Most people would assume one student simply worked harder. But what if the real difference was the time they studied? The same effort, the same intelligence, completely different results, because timing quietly multiplied one person's performance. This hidden force doesn't just influence students. It shapes athletes, doctors, entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, investors, parents, teachers. In fact, every human being on Earth lives under its influence whether they realize it or not. Nature has always understood this. Birds don't migrate whenever they feel like it. Flowers don't bloom randomly. The ocean doesn't ignore the moon. Everything follows rhythm. Everything follows timing. Only humans believe they can ignore it. And then we wonder why we're tired. One of the biggest lies modern society teaches us is that productivity means doing more. More hours, more meetings, more hustle, more pressure, more caffeine, more sacrifice. But imagine trying to fill a bucket with water while there's a giant hole at the bottom. No matter how much harder you work, most of your effort disappears. The smartest solution isn't carrying more water. It's fixing the leak. Timing works exactly like that. When your actions match your natural rhythm, ordinary effort suddenly produces extraordinary results. Instead of pushing twice as hard, you simply stop wasting energy. Let me tell you a short story. A young architect had a reputation for being brilliant. Every design competition he entered, he seemed to perform exceptionally well. His colleagues believed he possessed incredible creativity. One day, another architect asked him his secret. He smiled and said something unexpected. "I never design in the afternoon." His friend laughed. That's your secret. He nodded. I've noticed something about myself. Every afternoon I become impatient. I rush. I overlook details. I become frustrated. Instead of fighting it, I stopped asking my brain to do creative work during those hours. Instead, he spent afternoons organizing files, replying to emails, reviewing contracts, and planning future projects. Then every morning he returned to the creative work with fresh energy. His talent hadn't changed. His schedule had. Within a year, his productivity nearly doubled. People praised his intelligence. Few realized they were actually admiring his timing. This is something we often misunderstand. We think discipline means forcing ourselves to perform at maximum capacity every minute of every day. Real discipline looks different. Real discipline means understanding yourself deeply enough to know when to push and when not to, because every high performer eventually learns the same lesson. There are moments for action. There are moments for reflection. There are moments for planning. And there are moments when doing nothing is actually the smartest decision. Professional athletes understand this better than anyone. Imagine a marathon runner. Would they sprint from the starting line? Of course not. That would almost guarantee failure. The champion isn't the one who runs the fastest every second. The champion is the one who knows exactly when to conserve energy and exactly when to accelerate. Life follows the same principle. Yet many of us wake up every morning emotionally sprinting. We check notifications before getting out of bed. We answer emails while eating breakfast. We worry about tomorrow before finishing today. Our minds never receive a chance to prepare. By lunchtime we're exhausted, not because we worked too much, but because we worked without rhythm. Now think about your own daily routine. When do you feel completely alive? When does your mind feel sharp? When do ideas seem to appear effortlessly? And when do you feel like every simple task requires enormous effort? Don't answer based on what you wish were true. Answer based on what actually happens. Because your life is already giving you clues. Every single day. You simply haven't been paying attention. For the next few minutes, I want you to become an observer instead of a worker. Forget productivity. Forget success. Forget achievement. Just observe yourself. Notice when conversations feel easier. Notice when your patience disappears. Notice when reading becomes effortless. Notice when you become distracted by every little sound. These moments aren't random. They're messages. Your body has been speaking to you since the day you were born. The problem is that nobody ever taught you its language. Imagine buying the world's most advanced computer without receiving the instruction manual. You would probably use only a tiny fraction of its true power. That computer is your brain. And timing is the instruction manual almost nobody reads. Here's another interesting thought. Most people measure their lives using calendars. Birthdays, Mondays, weekends, New Year's Day, but your body measures life differently. It counts cycles, periods of energy, periods of recovery, periods of deep focus, periods of creativity. Ignoring these cycles is like ignoring the seasons. You can plant crops in December if you want. Nature simply won't cooperate. The same thing happens inside your mind. Sometimes your greatest obstacle isn't lack of motivation. It's poor timing disguised as laziness. That realization changes everything, because once you stop blaming yourself, you can finally begin understanding yourself. And that understanding is where real transformation begins. The most successful people aren't always the busiest people. They're often the people who have quietly learned one simple truth. Time isn't just something you spend. It's something you synchronize with. And once you discover that rhythm, work begins to feel lighter, learning becomes faster, decisions become clearer, and life itself starts flowing with a surprising sense of ease. The question is, how do you discover your own rhythm? And why do millions of people unknowingly sabotage themselves every single day simply because they choose the wrong moment to do the right thing? That answer begins with a tiny biological system inside your brain. One so small you would never notice it, yet powerful enough to influence almost every hour of your life. The tiny control center is no bigger than a grain of rice. If you could hold it in your hand, it wouldn't look impressive. Yet this microscopic network of cells silently decides when you feel alert, when you feel sleepy, when your memory performs at its best, and when your brain simply wants to slow down. Conductor of an orchestra. Imagine sitting in a concert hall. More than 100 musicians are waiting with their instruments. One plays the violin, Another holds a trumpet. Others sit behind giant drums. Every musician is exceptionally talented. But if each one begins playing whenever they want, the result isn't music. It's chaos. Now imagine a conductor raising a single baton. Without speaking a word, every instrument suddenly comes together. The melody becomes beautiful because everything happens at the right moment. Your body works the same way. Your heart, your lungs, your muscles, your digestive system, your hormones, your memory, your emotions, they all have their own jobs. But without timing, they would constantly work against one another. That tiny biological clock keeps everything synchronized. The surprising thing is that it isn't trying to make you productive. It's trying to keep you alive. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors didn't have alarm clocks or electric lights. They woke up with the sunrise because daylight meant opportunity. Darkness meant danger. Hunting, gathering food, finding water, and building shelter all depended on sunlight. Over thousands of generations, our brains adapted to this rhythm. Technology changed almost overnight. Our biology didn't. Today we stay awake until midnight staring at glowing screens. We wake up to loud alarms instead of sunlight. We drink coffee to convince our brains it's morning when they still think it's night. Then we wonder why we feel tired. Imagine flying from India to New York. Your watch changes immediately. Your body doesn't. For several days, you feel confused. You're hungry at strange hours. Sleep comes when it shouldn't. You struggle to focus. That's jet lag. Now consider something even stranger. Many people experience a smaller version of jet lag every single day without ever boarding an airplane. They ignore their body's rhythm so consistently that their internal clock and their daily schedule slowly become strangers. They force themselves awake, force themselves to concentrate, force themselves to stay productive. Eventually, they believe exhaustion is normal. It isn't, it's simply familiar. One entrepreneur once described his life in an interesting way. He said, "Every morning I feel like I'm swimming downstream. Every afternoon I feel like I'm swimming upstream." Nothing about his business changed. The customers stayed the same. His employees stayed the same. Even his workload stayed almost identical. Only one thing changed: the time of day. Once he recognized this pattern, he stopped scheduling critical meetings after lunch. Instead, he used those hours for routine work that required little mental effort. Within months, his company wasn't just growing faster. He was happier. That's the hidden gift of understanding timing. It doesn't necessarily require you to work longer. It asks you to work wiser. Now let's talk about something most people completely misunderstand. Have you ever heard someone proudly say, "I'm a night owl," while another person claims, "I'm an early bird"? Usually the conversation ends there. But these aren't just personality labels. They're biological differences. Imagine giving two runners the exact same shoes, the same training, the same food, the same coach, then asking one to compete at 6 in the morning and the other at 11 at night. Would their performances be identical? Probably not, because performance isn't only determined by preparation. It's influenced by timing. Some people naturally wake up full of energy. Before sunrise they're already planning their day. Their concentration is strongest early. Their decision-making feels effortless before breakfast. As evening arrives, that sharpness gradually fades. Others experience the exact opposite. Morning feels heavy. They need time before their minds truly awaken. As the afternoon passes, something changes. Ideas become clearer. Focus becomes stronger. Energy seems to rise instead of fall. Neither person is lazy. Neither person is superior. They're simply operating on different internal schedules. The problem begins when society expects everyone to perform identically. Imagine forcing every flower in a garden to bloom on the same day. Impossible. Some naturally bloom earlier, others later. Yet we expect every student to learn at exactly the same hour. Every employee to think creatively during the same meeting. Every entrepreneur to wake before dawn because someone successful once recommended it. Success leaves clues, but imitation without understanding often creates frustration. Instead of asking, "What time does a successful person wake up?" a better question is, "When does my mind naturally perform at its best?" That single question changes everything. Because your goal isn't to copy another person's clock. Your goal is to understand your own. Here's a simple exercise. Imagine your entire day divided into 3 chapters. The first chapter is when your mind feels strongest. The second is when your energy quietly begins slipping away. The third is when you experience a second wave of alertness before the day finally ends. Almost everyone experiences these chapters. The exact timing may differ, but the pattern itself appears again and again. Think about the first chapter. This is when your brain acts like the security guard. It carefully filters distractions. It notices errors. It stays disciplined. Complex thinking becomes easier. If you're solving mathematical problems, writing an important report, preparing for an examination, learning programming, or making a financial decision, this period often becomes your greatest advantage. Your attention feels solid. Your judgment feels reliable. Mistakes become easier to detect. Now imagine the second chapter. Something changes. Your eyelids feel heavier. Small tasks suddenly feel larger. You reread the same paragraph 3 times. Simple decisions become strangely difficult. You open your phone for just 1 minute, and somehow 20 minutes disappear. Most people think this means they've become lazy. Not necessarily. Sometimes your brain is simply asking for recovery. Imagine trying to keep driving a car after the fuel warning light has been flashing for an hour. Eventually, the engine protests. Your brain is no different. It isn't refusing to work. It's requesting maintenance. Unfortunately, many people respond with more pressure. Another cup of coffee, another energy drink, another motivational video, another promise to push harder. Sometimes what your mind truly needs is something much simpler. A genuine cause, not scrolling through social media, not answering another message, not watching random videos, a real break. Walk outside, stretch, drink water slowly, look at trees instead of screens. Talk to another human being. Breathe deeply enough for your shoulders to relax. These small moments may seem unproductive. Ironically, they often become the reason your next hour becomes dramatically more productive. Recovery is not the opposite of progress. Recovery makes progress possible. Now comes the third chapter of the day. This period surprises many people. After recovering, the mind begins changing once again. Something interesting happens. The strict mental filter that protected your concentration earlier begins relaxing. At first glance, that sounds like a disadvantage, but it creates an unexpected benefit. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle. When you're extremely focused, your mind looks directly at the obvious pieces. But sometimes the solution isn't obvious. Sometimes it requires connecting ideas that seem unrelated. When your mental filters loosen slightly, unusual combinations become easier to notice. That's why some of your best ideas arrive while taking a shower, walking alone, listening to music, or lying in bed just before sleep. Your brain isn't necessarily becoming smarter. It's becoming more flexible. Creative thinking often lives where perfect concentration ends. This explains why forcing creativity rarely works. Have you ever sat in front of a blank page saying, "I must come up with a brilliant idea right now"? Usually nothing happens. Hours later, while washing dishes or walking through a park, the answer suddenly appears. It feels mysterious. In reality, your brain simply entered a state where unexpected connections became easier to create. Understanding this changes how you organize your life. Instead of demanding every hour produce identical results, you begin assigning different jobs to different moments. Complex work, routine work, creative work, rest, each has its own ideal place. And once those pieces begin fitting together, your entire day starts feeling less like a battle, and more like a rhythm you were always meant to follow. But timing doesn't just shape our days. It quietly shapes entire lives. The moment we begin something can influence whether we finish it. The middle of every journey can either destroy our motivation or ignite it. And the way something ends often determines how we remember it forever. Understanding these hidden turning points may be even more powerful than mastering the hours of a single day. Sometimes we imagine success as a straight road. You make a plan, you stay disciplined, you work consistently, and eventually, you arrive exactly where you wanted to be. Real life rarely follows that script. Instead, it feels more like climbing a mountain hidden inside thick clouds. At the beginning, every step feels exciting because you're full of energy. It's close. Every small achievement gives you confidence. Then something unexpected happens. The excitement begins to fade. You haven't reached the summit, but you've already climbed too far to turn back comfortably. This is where countless dreams quietly disappear. Not because people lack talent, not because they lose intelligence, but because they misunderstand one simple truth. Every meaningful journey has a middle, and the middle is designed to test you. Think back to the last time you started something important. Maybe it was learning a new language, going to the gym, preparing for a competitive exam, building a business, starting a YouTube channel. The first few days probably felt amazing. Everything was new, every lesson was interesting, every improvement felt noticeable. You imagined the future version of yourself and smiled. Then came the ordinary days. No dramatic progress, no exciting breakthroughs, just repetition. That's the moment when most people begin asking themselves dangerous questions. Maybe I'm not talented enough. Maybe this isn't meant for me. Maybe someone else could do this better. The reality is often much simpler. You have simply reached the middle. Imagine watching a movie that begins with an incredible opening scene. The hero is introduced, the mission is clear, the audience is excited. Now imagine the movie jumps directly to the final victory. No challenges, no setbacks, no uncertainty. It would be one of the most boring movies ever created. Stories become meaningful because of what happens between the beginning and the ending. Your own life follows the same pattern. The middle isn't evidence that something is wrong. The middle is where transformation happens. Here's an interesting observation. Visit any gym during the first week of January. You'll probably struggle to find an empty treadmill. Every machine is occupied. People are motivated, determined, optimistic. Everyone believes this year will finally be different. Now visit that same gym in the middle of March. The crowd has quietly disappeared. The equipment is available again. Did everyone's goals suddenly become impossible? No, most people simply confused motivation with commitment. Motivation starts the journey. Commitment carries you through the middle. Imagine building a bridge across a river. The first few meters are exciting because you're standing safely on land. The final few meters are exciting because success is visible. But the center of the bridge feels different. Below you is deep water. Ahead lies unfinished work. Behind lies too much effort to abandon. That's where doubt appears. Not because you're failing, because you're growing. Growth rarely announces itself with fireworks. Most of the time it feels ordinary. A child doesn't notice themselves becoming taller every morning. An investor doesn't become wealthy after one smart decision. A musician doesn't master an instrument after one practice session. Improvement is almost invisible while it's happening. Only later do we notice how far we've come. This is why patience becomes a competitive advantage. In a world obsessed with instant results, the person willing to stay through the boring middle quietly moves ahead. Consider two friends who decide to learn the guitar. The first practices passionately for 3 weeks, then stops. The second practices for 20 minutes almost every day. No dramatic performances, no viral videos, just quiet consistency. A year later, the difference feels unbelievable. Not because one possessed extraordinary talent, because one respected the power of small moments repeated over time. Success often looks dramatic from a distance. Up close, it's surprisingly ordinary. Another interesting thing happens in the middle of every journey. We begin comparing ourselves to everyone else. A student preparing for an examination sees someone finishing the syllabus faster. An artist watches another artist gain thousands of followers. A new entrepreneur reads about businesses growing overnight. Social media makes this even worse. We scroll through carefully edited highlights while comparing them with our behind-the-scenes reality. Imagine watching the last 10 minutes of someone else's marathon. They're smiling, they're celebrating, they're crossing the finish line. What you don't see are the hundreds of lonely mornings they spent training while everyone else slept. Comparison removes context, and without context, confidence disappears. Instead of comparing your chapter 3 with someone else's chapter 20, compare yourself with the person you were 6 months ago. Are you thinking differently, learning faster, handling stress more calmly, making better decisions? Those victories matter. They're simply harder to photograph. Now let me tell you about another trap hiding in the middle. At first, comfort sounds wonderful. Who doesn't want life to become easier? But comfort has an unusual habit. It quietly lowers our standards. Imagine climbing a staircase. You reach a comfortable step. The view is pleasant. You're no longer struggling. Without realizing it, you stop climbing. Not because you've reached the top, Because you've become comfortable enough to stay where you are. Growth demands periodic discomfort, not constant suffering, not endless stress, just enough challenge to remind your brain it's still expanding. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. At first, balancing feels impossible. Eventually it becomes effortless. If you kept practicing only what already felt easy, you would never learn to ride faster, steer better, or explore new roads. The same principle applies to every skill. The moment something becomes comfortable, it's often time to raise the challenge slightly. But here's where wisdom becomes important. Challenge is valuable, burnout isn't. Many ambitious people confuse the two. They believe every hour must be intense. Every day must be exhausting. Every week must push them to their limits. Imagine trying to sprint an entire marathon. It sounds impressive, until you collapse after the first few kilometers. Endurance wins longer races. Life is the longest race you'll ever run. Treating every day like an emergency eventually convinces your brain that everything is stressful. And when everything feels urgent, nothing receives your full attention. One of the greatest performers in any field isn't necessarily the busiest person. It's often the person who understands pacing. When to accelerate, when to recover, when to remain patient, when to become aggressive. This rhythm appears everywhere. A skilled chess player doesn't attack randomly. An experienced investor doesn't buy impulsively. A master chef doesn't rush every dish. Timing separates amateurs from experts. Then, one day, something remarkable happens. You wake up and realize the thing that once felt impossible has become normal. Reading 10 pages becomes reading 50. Running 1 kilometer becomes running 10. Speaking confidently becomes natural. Coding for an hour becomes coding for an entire afternoon without noticing time passing. This transformation rarely happens dramatically. It arrives quietly, like sunrise. You don't see darkness disappear all at once. The light simply grows stronger until suddenly you realize morning has arrived. Personal growth follows the same pattern. Most breakthroughs aren't explosive, they're accumulated. Hundreds of ordinary days creating one extraordinary result. And just when you begin believing you've mastered the journey, another hidden force begins influencing your life. Not the beginning, not the middle, but the ending. Because surprisingly, people rarely remember an experience exactly as it happened. Instead, our minds judge entire chapters of life by a few powerful moments, especially how they end. And understanding that simple truth can completely change the way you design your work, your relationships, your goals, and even the memories you leave behind. One of the greatest misunderstandings about success is believing that the finish line is simply where the work ends. It isn't. The finish line is where meaning begins. Imagine watching two people complete exactly the same marathon. The first runner crosses the finish line, immediately collapses onto the ground, grabs their phone, and begins answering emails. The second runner slows down, looks around, hugs the people who supported the journey, smiles, and quietly reflects on how far they've come. Both finished the same race, but only one truly experienced the ending. We spend so much of our lives chasing the next goal that we rarely allow ourselves to recognize the one we've just achieved. Graduate, find a job, get promoted, buy a house, build a business, reach 100,000 subscribers, reach 1 million. Then what? Another goal, another mountain, another finish line. Ambition is a beautiful thing. But without appreciation, ambition becomes an endless treadmill. No matter how fast you run, you never feel like you've arrived. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack during a long journey. Every few hours you stop, place the bag on the ground, stretch your shoulders, drink some water, and continue walking. Those small pauses don't slow the journey. They make it possible. Celebrating progress works exactly the same way. It allows your mind to recognize growth before beginning another challenge. This is why many successful people still feel empty. They've mastered achievement, but forgotten reflection. Their lives become collections of completed projects instead of meaningful experiences. Think about childhood for a moment. Why do birthdays feel special? Not because we suddenly become wiser overnight. Not because life changes dramatically at midnight. Birthdays matter because they invite reflection. They quietly ask us a simple question. What has this year taught you? Without these natural pauses, life begins blending together. Days become weeks, weeks become years. Eventually people wonder where the time went. Perhaps time didn't disappear. Perhaps they simply never stopped long enough to notice it. Here's something fascinating about memory. Imagine taking a vacation that lasts 7 wonderful days. 6 days are incredible, beautiful beaches, amazing food, wonderful conversations. Then, on the final evening, you miss your flight home, lose your luggage, and spend hours frustrated at the airport. Years later, what story are you likely to tell? Unfortunately, many people remember the stressful ending more vividly than the joyful week that came before it. Now imagine the opposite. Suppose the vacation begins with heavy rain, delayed flights, and unexpected problems. But gradually everything improves. The final days become unforgettable. As you board your flight home, you're smiling. When friends ask about the trip later, what will you probably say? It was amazing. The ending quietly reshaped the entire memory. Our minds don't remember life like security cameras. They remember moments, peaks, turning points, endings. This simple truth changes the way we should design our lives. Think about conversations. Have you ever noticed how a single sentence can change the memory of an entire discussion? Two friends enjoy hours of laughter. Then one careless comment creates unnecessary tension. Suddenly the evening feels different. The ending becomes the emotional headline. This doesn't only happen in relationships. It happens in classrooms, business meetings, job interviews, presentations, family dinners, even ordinary days. The final few minutes often become the memory we carry forward. Imagine finishing every workday by asking yourself 3 simple questions. What did I learn today? What am I grateful for today? What's the most important thing to begin tomorrow? Those 3 questions take less than 5 minutes. Yet over months, they quietly retrain your brain to end each day with clarity instead of chaos. Most people end their evenings differently. They scroll endlessly, watch random videos, answer unnecessary messages, fall asleep worrying about tomorrow, then wake up mentally exhausted before the day has even begun. Endings influence beginnings more than we realize. A peaceful evening often creates a focused morning. A stressful ending often creates an anxious beginning. Your days are connected like chapters in a novel. Each ending writes the opening sentence of the next chapter. Now let's zoom out even further. Imagine your life as a collection of seasons instead of years. There are seasons of learning, seasons of building, seasons of waiting, seasons of healing, seasons of leading. The mistake many people make is believing they should always be in harvest season. They expect constant results, constant recognition, constant progress. Nature doesn't work that way. Neither do humans. A farmer doesn't panic because seeds remain invisible beneath the soil. He understands that growth is happening where eyes cannot see. Imagine if he dug up the seeds every morning just to check whether they were growing. He would destroy the very process he was trying to observe. Many people do exactly this with their dreams. They become impatient. They constantly question themselves. Why haven't I succeeded yet? Why am I still unknown? Why is someone else moving faster? Growth beneath the surface often appears invisible. Confidence, wisdom, discipline, patience, resilience. These qualities develop quietly long before success becomes visible to others. People celebrate the fruit. They rarely notice the years spent growing the roots. And without deep roots, every storm becomes dangerous. Life has a strange sense of humor. The moments we wish would last forever usually pass the fastest. Childhood, college, friendships, family dinners, long conversations late at night. One ordinary day eventually becomes the last ordinary day. You simply don't know it at the time. That realization isn't meant to make us sad. It's meant to make us present. Imagine meeting an old friend after 20 years. What would matter more, the expensive restaurant, or the conversation? Probably the conversation. Time has a way of revealing what was always important. The older people become, the less they speak about the things they bought. Instead, they remember people, experiences, journeys, moments that made them feel alive. That's because endings have a unique gift. They separate what truly mattered from what merely occupied our attention. If today were the final page of this chapter in your life, what would you want to remember? Would you remember another hour spent worrying? Another argument over something insignificant? Another evening lost to endless scrolling? Or would you remember the courage to begin something meaningful? The discipline to continue when motivation disappeared? And the wisdom to appreciate how far you've already come? These questions don't require immediate answers. They simply deserve your attention. Because the quality of your life is rarely determined by one enormous decision. More often, it's shaped by hundreds of small decisions repeated at the right moments. But there's one final piece of the puzzle, a lesson that transforms not only individuals, but entire teams, families, and communities. Because no great achievement is created completely alone. Human beings are at their best when they move together with a shared rhythm. And understanding that rhythm may be one of the most overlooked advantages in the modern world. There's something extraordinary about watching a group of people move as if they share one mind. Think about an orchestra performing a masterpiece. Dozens of musicians sit on the same stage. Each person has spent years mastering a different instrument. One plays the violin, another the piano, someone else the cello. A few old brass instruments powerful enough to shake the entire hall. Individually, every musician is talented. But talent alone doesn't create harmony. Imagine if every performer decided to follow their own rhythm. The violin begins early. The drums arrive late. The piano speeds ahead. Within seconds, beautiful music turns into unbearable noise. Now picture the conductor raising a single hand. Suddenly everything changes. Nobody has become more talented. Nobody has practiced harder. The only difference is synchronization. Every note arrives at exactly the right moment. That is where greatness is born. The same principle quietly shapes almost every successful team on earth. Whether it's a family raising children, a football club chasing a championship, a company building revolutionary technology, or a rescue team responding to an emergency, the most important ingredient is rarely individual brilliance. It's rhythm. Imagine trying to row a boat across a lake with 8 people. If everyone rows with maximum strength but in different directions, the boat spins in circles. Add one person whose only job is keeping everyone together, and suddenly the boat glides effortlessly across the water. Strength matters. Coordination multiplies strength. This is one reason some small companies outperform organizations 10 times their size. It isn't because they have unlimited resources. It's because everyone knows the rhythm. They understand the mission. They communicate clearly. They trust each other. Meanwhile, a larger organization may have more money, more employees, and more experience, yet accomplish less because every department moves in a different direction. Imagine an ant colony. No ant understands the entire plan. Yet together they build enormous underground cities. They gather food, protect the colony, care for future generations, not because one ant is exceptionally intelligent, because thousands of tiny actions happen in harmony. Human beings often underestimate this power. We celebrate individual heroes, the genius entrepreneur, the legendary athlete, the brilliant scientist, but behind nearly every remarkable achievement stands a team moving together. Even the greatest athlete depends on coaches, doctors, family, trainee partners, nutritionists. No mountain is climbed entirely alone. Now imagine 2 workplaces. In the first office, everyone arrives on time. Meetings begin exactly when scheduled. People openly share ideas. Problems are discussed honestly. Everyone understands why their work matters. Employees leave feeling respected. In the second office, meetings begin late. Nobody communicates clearly. People hide mistakes out of fear. Departments compete instead of cooperating. The same number of employees, the same salaries, the same equipment, completely different results. Why? Because culture is simply synchronized behavior repeated over time. Families work the same way. Have you ever noticed how every family develops invisible traditions? Maybe everyone eats dinner together. Maybe Sunday mornings are reserved for grandparents. Maybe birthdays always include handwritten letters. These traditions may seem ordinary, yet years later, they're often remembered more vividly than expensive gifts. Shared rituals create shared identity. Without realizing it, they tell everyone involved, this is who we are. The strongest communities aren't built only by solving problems. They're built by sharing meaningful moments. Imagine attending a concert where thousands of strangers begin singing the same song. Nobody planned it, nobody rehearsed it, yet for a few minutes one breathes together, sings together, feels together. That feeling is powerful because humans are naturally wired for connection. Long before cities existed, survival depended on belonging to a tribe. Being separated from the group often meant danger. Our brains still carry traces of that ancient reality. This explains why loneliness hurts more than many physical injuries. We're not designed merely to exist beside other people. We're designed to move with them. Now consider something else. Why do sports fans become emotional while watching complete strangers compete? Why do people celebrate victories together? Why do they cry after championships? Because shared emotion creates powerful memories. The score matters, but belonging matters even more. The same principle transforms leadership. Many people believe leadership means giving orders. Real leadership looks different. A true leader creates rhythm. Imagine two managers. The first constantly tells employees what they're doing wrong. Every mistake becomes criticism. Every conversation creates anxiety. People work because they're afraid. The second manager also expects excellence. But instead of creating fear, they create purpose. Everyone understands the mission. People help one another instead of competing. Mistakes become opportunities to improve rather than reasons for embarrassment. Which team will perform better over 5 years? The answer is obvious. Fear creates compliance. Purpose creates commitment. And commitment lasts much longer. One interesting habit appears again and again among outstanding teams. They pause, not because they're lazy, because they understand reflection. After finishing an important project, they don't immediately rush into the next one. They asked questions. What worked? What failed? What surprised us? What should we never repeat? These conversations seem small. Over years, they become priceless. Every mistake becomes a lesson instead of a permanent problem. Imagine driving across the country without ever checking your map. Eventually, even a tiny wrong turn becomes hundreds of kilometers in the wrong direction. Reflection is how we correct those small mistakes before they become expensive ones. This applies equally to personal life. Suppose every Sunday evening you spent just 15 minutes reviewing your week. Not judging yourself, simply observing. When did I feel most focused? What distracted me unnecessarily? Which conversations gave me energy? Which habits quietly stole it? What deserves more attention next week? Imagine doing this for 1 year. 15 minutes every week. Nothing dramatic. No expensive courses. No complicated productivity systems. Just honest observation. You wouldn't become a different person overnight. But after 52 weeks, your understanding of yourself would be almost unrecognizable. Most people collect information. Very few collect self-awareness. And self-awareness is one of the highest forms of intelligence. Because once you understand your own patterns, you stop living accidentally. You begin living intentionally. Now let's step back and look at everything we've discovered together. We began by asking a simple question. What if success depends not only on what we do, but also on when we do it? Along the journey, we uncovered an invisible rhythm guiding every day. Moments when our minds are naturally sharp. Moments when recovery becomes more valuable than effort. Moments when creativity quietly replaces concentration. We explored why beginnings deserve intention instead of impulse. Why the middle of every journey isn't a sign to quit but an invitation to persist. Why endings shape memories far more than we realize. And finally, why individuals achieve impressive things, but synchronized people achieve extraordinary ones. If there's one lesson connecting every idea, it's this. Life isn't asking you to become someone else. It isn't asking you to copy another person's morning routine, career path, or definition of success. It's asking you to understand your own rhythm. To recognize that time isn't your enemy. It's your partner. The people who appear effortlessly successful usually aren't fighting against life. They're flowing with it. They've learned when to push, when to pause, when to begin, when to wait, when to let go, and when to give everything they have. Perhaps the greatest transformation doesn't come from finding more hours in the day. Perhaps it comes from respecting the hours you already have. Because every sunrise quietly gives you another opportunity. Not just to work harder, but to live wiser. So tomorrow morning, before rushing into another busy day, pause for a moment. Ask yourself one simple question. What is the most important thing this moment is asking of me? Sometimes the answer will be courage. Sometimes discipline. Sometimes patience. Sometimes rest. Learning to recognize the difference may become one of the most valuable skills you ever develop. Thank you for spending this time with Volume and Vision. If this journey changed the way you think about time, even in the smallest way, remember that knowledge becomes powerful only when it is applied. Choose one idea from today's video and put it into practice within the next 24 hours. You might be surprised by how one small change in timing can create a completely different outcome. If you enjoy thoughtful book-inspired content that helps you think deeper, live smarter, and grow every day, subscribe to Volume and Vision and join us for the next journey. Until then, remember this: you don't always need more time. Sometimes, you simply need the right moment.